Hi, my name's Neil Ritchie. I'm a freelance journalist, and I always like to be as accurate as possible. A few of us here, including myself.
Just a question, Neil,
this
please.
Is a direct, this
limited
is
for time.
directed at Gareth Hughes. Okay, a few of us were at the Petroleum Summit last week, and your co-leader Russell Norman said, and I believe this is it, and I'm just seeking clarification. We're against deep water drilling, we're against fracking, and we are against any new oil and gas developments. But he seemed to change his tune towards the end. You have just said,
can we have a question, please, Neil?
We're not against shallow water or onshore. So,
what's the Green position?
What's the Green position?
Right. Okay, we'll get that from Gareth.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Neil. I was hoping to try and clarify that in my presentation. Obviously, I haven't succeeded, so good to have this opportunity again. So it's not our caucus who makes our policy in the Green Party. We've got a very open member process, and it's currently being reviewed through our party. So we've got a very clear position on deep sea drilling, which is we would prohibit it. That's what 99% of submitters to the Select Committee also said. When it comes to fracking, we're pushing for a moratorium. We're on the cusp of a massive expansion. We think until the PCE reports back, until those recommendations are enacted, we shouldn't be expanding this controversial practice. And when it comes to shallow and onshore, you're right, we're not opposed. Our policy is for a transition away. So what we're saying is we would look at each of future proposals on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, we want a strengthened regulatory regime. We want to protect the environment, locals. But our priority when it comes to shallow and onshore, we don't say it should be prohibited. We support a transition strategy taking into account the reality of climate change.
Right, so it's no to offshore, no more to fracking, and maybe to onshore drilling or close shallow drilling. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you very much for that cogent and succinct and clear explanation. Next question. Over here. Ma'am, if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks. My name's Marie Baker. I'm a lawyer. First, David, you referred to the Crown Mineral Act amendments that have introduced health and safety and environmental aspects to the Crown Minerals Act regime. And second, David, you referred to how well regulated the industry
heavily
is.
regulated,
The industry is at the moment. So what I'd like to understand from any of the panel who've got a view on this is what's the reasoning behind the new duplication of environmental regulation, in particular under the Crown Minerals Act, that duplicates RMA and the EEZ regulations now, and is that a good thing, and what's it going to do?
Why the duplication, and is it a good thing, David?
There's no duplication. So what we do at the Crown Minerals, the permitting stage, is effectively, administer a screening. We look at previous history, and we look at the governance procedures and processes. Now, that's at the very start of the process, so the assessment that you would make through the RMA around environmental credentials and health and safety will be when the operation is understood. What we are doing is giving people the right to explore and access to land. So it's very much a front screen, and it's almost to bottom slice bad performance. So that's the way I would think about it, and the checks and balances that come in later in the process are a different beast altogether.
Stuart, I'll take Stuart next if he wishes to comment. He may not. No. He doesn't. David Robinson?
Yeah, look, I'm probably reasonably consistent with Dave Binney. Our view is that legislation shouldn't overlap. It becomes a bit of a Venn diagram, and you get two parties looking at the same thing, and that can be repetitive and difficult. But I think, as David said, as a screener of I suppose they've got the no cowboy rule here. That's probably the right place to do it right up front. Don't even let them here in the first place. I'm only interested in representing top quality operators, full stop.
Gareth, any comment from you?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd just say, well, don't take my word whether the industry's regulated enough or not, but listen to Parliament's independent officer, which is the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. And she said, and when it comes to fracking, and she drew many conclusions and said it's akin to the wider oil and gas sector, is she very clearly said that the industry had light-handed, fragmented regulatory regime And in many cases, it was up to the industry themselves to self-regulate. So I acknowledge there has been a significant improvement over the last couple of years. We've had some serious tragedies which have driven that. We're going in the right direction, but I think we've still got some way to go. And I guess every industry probably thinks there's too much regulation in their sector. But having strong rules to protect our environment and our health and safety, I think everyone can agree we want to have world-class regulation in New Zealand.
Next question. Preponderance again on this side of the room.
Yeah, Ralph Broad, New Plymouth District Council. The RMA gives a responsibility for addressing hazardous substances currently, but that's to be taken away in the next phase of the RMA reforms. This is probably for Dave Binney, but I'm just wondering in terms of the overall look at health and safety, the health and safety on site is governed by your people in the high hazards unit.
Yep.
There's a gap between that and considering the environmental safety. Is that, it seems to be almost double dipping to me, just because it's so overlapping. Is there a move to have a one-stop shop as far as hazardous processes and substances are concerned, and would that be you?
And you've put that to Dave Binney.
I think that's
yes. Okay.
So I'm not an expert in the RMA. The high hazards unit is forming at the moment, and the rules around that and the legislation is forming. There is the concept of a safety case, which is the fundamental position for companies where it would be their performance is going to be and the design of those systems is going to be accepted by the high hazards unit. I think there is some work to do between the two systems, the RMA and the health and safety, still, because I think there is some overlaps, and people tell me when I go around. I don't know the specifics of those, but I think that there is some overlaps to be ironed out, but I think there's a willingness to look at that.
Alison Adam-Smith from Opus in New Plymouth. My question is about royalties. In the research I've done, I've noticed that the very local community takes a lot of the pain and might like something back. So what are the thoughts from all the panellists about royalties on a very local, a regional and a national level?
Okay, that's a good question. So royalty, I know that they apply in Australia, and they keep a lot of very small local authorities in Western Australia able to provide good facilities for their communities. Good question. We'll go right down the line. Stuart, David, Gareth and David in that order. David will probably say no comment because he only works for the government. He doesn't make policy. Stuart.
Yes. I probably don't have a clear view on royalties. Where I think there is an intellectual debate, when a region is host of this industry, there is a lot of pressure on infrastructure, whether that's roading infrastructure, port, health infrastructure. I'm challenged by that debt burden then falling on the local community. And if at the moment ports are owned, in our case 100% by the Taranaki community, is it fair that the debt burden on infrastructure is then placed just on the Taranaki community when those benefits are flowing to the national purse? Now, whether that is a pricing mechanism through royalties or an acknowledgement from government, if you're speculating in this industry, you need to put a bit of investment up front on building some stuff. I'd probably be more comfortable with an understanding that you need to invest for the future, and that is around key infrastructure.
But when you say you need to invest, you mean that the nation needs to invest in the region.
So it would be seen as nation building rather than, though I'm paid to be parochially one-eyed, I actually think it is part of a nation building agenda.
Okay. So either direct funding for particular pieces of infrastructure or a royalty. David Robinson?
And look, I think there's genuine issues around activities and roading and so on. The Crown would say that is collected through the road user fees and comes back that way, but I'm not sure whether that's quite the case or not. No. Our view as an industry is that we should certainly be looking at royalties being distributed a proportion in the local area. I think where that gets problematic is that Taranaki, you just look at the metrics as far as economic performance for any regional part of New Zealand, and Taranaki's way out in front because you're already getting all of the economic benefits that come from oil and gas all flow right through into the community here. So adding more, I guess, sugar on top of the whole thing by tipping royalties back in would mean that you didn't have money to invest in regions which actually are at the bottom of the list places like Northland and the East Coast. So you get down to a distribution of wealth debate, and you get down to, does the Crown differentiate between $1 from dairy or $1 from, I suppose, boat building in Auckland and $1 from oil and gas in Taranaki, and then try and distribute that? And I think you open a whole can of worms on that, which is why I think the Crown at the moment looks as that as just being an equitable, collect all the money and then make the distribution choices centrally based on need rather than where it's generated. And look, I suppose, personally speaking, I can't argue with that rationale, frankly, but we certainly believe that on the East Coast, where there is potential growth, it might be a very good idea to put some of the royalties in there and give the local region a real lift.
Except that the irony of that, and people in local government here will know this, the roading funding, roading assistance specifically, is actually tagged to a deprivation index. And if the capital value of your district goes up, the percentage of funding, roading maintenance assistance you get from the Crown goes down. So paradoxically, the moment you develop, either through dairying or oil and minerals, you actually get less assistance than you would if you'd stayed poor. But I'll just leave that thought with you, David, to it's part of your stakeholder relationship building exercise. Gareth.
Far too complex for me, Jim, I'm afraid.
Well, it's a true fact.
I'd vote for you, though.
Oh.
I'd give you a vote.
Thank you.
Well, I guess my contribution would be to say it's a vexed issue that the Green Party doesn't have a policy position on. Obviously, I think regions could strongly make an argument, but likewise, I think iwi equally could make a strong argument that maybe they should be getting a slice of royalties. So we don't have a policy position that X% should go to the regions or not. I guess we'd note we've got the fourth lowest tax plus royalty rate in the world. There's 46 million in tax breaks, which we would reduce. And then I guess a related issue is the central support for the regions and the consenting regime. So take, the Gisborne District Council, a unitary authority, not a wealthy council, struggling with new permit areas opening up, new consent. So I'd like to see more greater central government support, assisting our councils with advice and support.
David, do you want to comment?
Yes, so I've just category is this is a government policy decision, so I've not got a view right or wrong, so I'll just stay right in the middle. I think it does come into the what's in it for me conversation, and I think that's a live conversation with multi-dimensions of which is one of them. I think the pressure will come to answer it loud and clear if there's much more wealth created from this industry. That's what happened in Norway, and I think the same pressures will come to bear here.
I'm Sarah Down. I'm a student and work for the Ngaitahu Research Centre. All of the panellists spoke really strongly about the need for consultation. And with that in mind, I wondered if you had any thoughts on the proposal to make exploration a non-notifiable discretionary activity.
Okay, you want an answer from everybody?
Whoever wants to give an
Okay,
answer.
so it's all or any. Put your hand up if you want to have a go. Gareth, I thought you... I kind of had a feeling in me waters that you might be there or thereabouts, Gareth. Go for it.
Yeah, well, obviously I don't support it. I voted against it in Parliament this week, despite voting for the marine legislation bill, which is doing what we should have done more than 10 years ago, which is the bulk of this bill is acceding to some international treaties when accidents happen at sea from ships, so the taxpayer can get more money. So while supporting the legislation, we voted against the government's amendment introducing the non-notified discretionary category. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's going to get public buy-in. I think doing it this way, through the back door, when the legislation only passed last year, avoiding any select committee scrutiny or Bill of Rights Act vet, I think is unfortunate. I don't think it's going to build support for it. But ultimately, when you look at exploratory drilling, I'd contend that's riskier than production drilling. That's what the European Union recently came to the conclusion in a report. Obviously, it was the Macondo Gulf spill that was an exploratory well where all the information isn't known. So if there's any area that should have a public say, I'd say it's this. And of course, the issue of an oil spill isn't going to stop at the 12 nautical mile local council jurisdictional limit. An oil spill would affect all of New Zealand. So I think it's appropriate and fair for Kiwis to have a say.
David Robinson.
Yeah, look, I think this notion, it's an interesting notion of notified discretionary or non-notified discretionary. And the view that we have as an industry is that you make a decision as a nation whether you're going to drill for oil and gas or not. And the decision that's been made by the current regime is that we're going to try and develop these resources. So then we get down to saying, are we going to then have a debate about every single well that is going to be drilled? Because you're not debating or discussing the effects of a well or the affected parties or any of those sorts of things that you'd typically associate with a RMA consent, because there are no affected parties out there. The question is, do you relitigate the notion of drilling for oil or gas or not? And our view is that that decision has been taken, and the effects of drilling a single deep sea or any well offshore is that you've got a very, very tiny footprint. You're drilling a hole that's this big at the surface and goes down to that big at the bottom, and it has virtually no effects. There is always the potential effect of a spill, and you can't govern on the basis of those potential effects. You have to govern on the actual effects, and that's why we believe that a non-notified discretionary consent puts the authority and the power with the EPA, and they go through a rigorous process on behalf of all New Zealanders to make sure that that is done to the manner and extent to which New Zealand expects it to be done. And I think that one of the things that Kiwis have got to perhaps have is confidence in our regulators and our authorities to make these decisions and to govern our industry and every other industry. You've got qualified people who draw from international expertise to make these decisions. It's not a free lunch for our industry by any stretch of the imagination. Now, all New Zealanders at all times can express their views, and I think New Zealanders do that. How many forums do you need to have to create those opportunities to express those views? You've said you're from Ngāi Tahu, and I'll be with Ngāi Tahu at a fairly significant hui on Friday, and it will be an opportunity to share views and things there. So I think the industry is absolutely open to shared views and open to the opportunity to do that. I think also whether you have a notified process or not does not mean that the public's excluded from it. The public is very heavily involved, and a lot of the non-notified consents, and I think the majority of consents, resource consents in Taranaki are non-notified, but there is within that non-notified process a huge amount of consultation. And if I look at the consultation that's gone on in and around the wells that are being drilled in Taranaki now, and the engagements and the various people that have had to have been engaged in the environmental impact assessments and things like that, it's phenomenal. So, you know, technically speaking, you can say, well, it's non-notified, but it does not mean people are not engaged or having the opportunity to have their say in the process.
And so I wonder if you'd be so kind at the conclusion of a very provocative and interesting session, where we heard a very sincerely argued and clearly and lucidly presented contrasting set of views and opinions, facts and theories. You now have quite a lot more, I think, to digest and contemplate and consider. You have a range of alternatives, both in terms of what we're doing now and where our future might lie. And I want to thank our four panellists for the lucidity, the good nature, and the rationality and thoroughness of their presentations. And I'll just make this presentation to David Binney, and also at the far end of the table to Stuart Trundle as well. So would you be so kind as to join me in thanking Stuart Trundle, David Robertson, Gareth Hughes, and David Binney.